Okay, welcome to Rail Families United. We are going to be starting a series called The Players, because a lot of times people want to know who are the players in all of this. And so there's a lot of them. And so that's what this series is going to be about. And unlike other series, you don't need to really watch this particular series in any specific order. You can watch whichever video you want based on which player you're interested in. And so in this particular video, we're going to be looking at former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who was Prime Minister from 2006 to 2015. That would include the Mac Yard incident in Macmillan Yard outside of Toronto. And it would also include the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. We're also going to look at former Ministers of Transportation, Lawrence Cannon, who was Minister of Transportation during the Mac Yard incident. Then it was John Baird, who oversaw the attempted rewrite of SOR 87-150. It was Cannon who initiated that attempted rewrite, but John Baird was the person who was there at the end of that, what I consider total public scam exercise. Then there was a person by the name of Chuck Strahl. Doesn't really fit into a lot of the issues other than potentially, changes to railway employee training programs that may have been implemented in the field without proper review and approval by Transport Canada. The same would be true of Denis Lebel. And then there was Minister of Transportation Lisa Raitt from July 2013 to November 2015. She was there when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed, and she was the person who signed off on that Transportation Safety Board report R13W0260 in matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Okay, so Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister of Canada from February 2006 to November 2015. So that's when there was the I believe it was September 12, 2007 CN Rail Mac Yard incident, which is the subject of R07T0270. That's the Transportation Safety Board Railway Investigation Report into that incident. And that resulted in the first attempt to supposedly overhaul all frontline rail worker training programs. In reality, this Railway Safety Action Section 19 order by then Minister of Transportation Lawrence Cannon was, in my opinion, simply a veiled safety action taken, which was nothing more than an attempt by the Railway Association of Canada and the Government of Canada to water down laws. That's my opinion. You can form your own when we go over this stuff. So the law that they were attempting to water down was SOR 87-150, or the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, which was there to protect frontline rail workers via what I would show to be a complete and total public scam, like that rewrite, that overhaul they tried to do. I refer to it as a total public scam. It resulted in a document known as TC for Transport Canada 0-102, or a document known as the proposed new Rules Respecting Minimum Qualification Standards for Railway Employees. So that was TCO 0-102, and that was approved by Transport Canada when John Baird was the Minister of Transportation, and it was approved on June 23, 2009 by the Governor and Council, which includes a team of people, the Minister of Transportation being one of them, but I believe the Governor General of Canada is there and is taking the advice of, these ministers, whatever. Probably would also include the President of the Privy Council, because the Transportation Safety Board reports in to the Privy Council. So again, there's a lot of people involved here. But anyways, this new proposed document, again, was approved by Transport Canada on June 23rd, 2009. And when you see all the issues with this document, you really have to ask yourself, why was it approved by the Government of Canada in any way, shape, or form? As we get into this document, you're going to see why I say that. Conductor trainee Jason Clooney, who was the father of two, was killed on November 18, 2013. So R13W0260, in my opinion, is another total public scam document, which I used for my dissection of a rail worker death investigation, showing the complete and total corruption of the Transportation Safety Board and Transport Canada via what I call Visual 1. That's where I took that TSB rail investigation report and I totally marked it up in red to show you how many problems there are with that report, and that's only some of them. My analysis of that document, as well as of the Transport Canada Health and Safety Officer report, that report is 80 pages long, pertaining to this same death, is or will also be provided via my video files. So R13W0260, that report was finalized when Lisa Raitt was the Minister of Transportation. So you can see, just under Stephen Harper, there were at least, 5 or 6 ministers of transportation. Constant turnover in that department. And maybe that's part of the problem, but there's no excuse, in my opinion, for the complete lack of oversight in these issues by Transport Canada. Also, Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister when the father of 3, Jamie, and I think his last name is Gigian, I don't know quite how to say that. He was a CP assistant conductor, and he was killed in 2012 in Regina. He's the one who was crushed because he was not familiar with that rail yard, and there was snow on the tracks, and they were using a rare section of the rail yard, and he was crushed between a locomotive and a rail car in the foul when the train ended up taking, it was diverted when he thought that it was going to keep going straight, and he ended up getting crushed and killed. So Denis Lebel was Minister of Transportation when that happened. And then there was also the father of one person, CN rail conductor Kevin Timmerman. John Baird was Minister of Transportation when Timmerman was killed in Saskatoon in April of 2015. And no negligence investigations were conducted when perhaps they should have been in these deaths and others. It's rail police that has the first jurisdiction in these matters. But, if they don't refer it to like the RCMP or whatever for potential criminal negligence, maybe because they have conflicts of interest or whatever, they want to protect their employers. There's issues when people are dying and there's not proper investigations done when maybe there should be, because there might have been some negligence involved in what caused a death. So in the case of Kevin Timmerman, he was killed. He was killed in Saskatoon, and some of his family members, I understand, were on the scene when he was killed, that he may have had a brother and a brother-in-law there, and, he wasn't killed instantly, and, maybe when you have family members as witnesses, that doesn't bode well for Transport Canada or CN as far as what we're going to put out there as a proper investigation, right? Because when you've got family members as potential witnesses, that doesn't usually go well. But Timmerman, I thought the word was, and I don't know if this is true because I don't have the documentation pertaining to his death, but there are definitely people that say that he had been advised by rail traffic control that no other trains would be coming in that night in the Saskatoon yard, and he was walking back to the office when he was hit because a train did come in. It had been, I guess, diverted or whatever, and so he was killed. So that's an issue as far as rail traffic control. They say, well, expect a train anytime is train time. Expect a train at any time, any direction, whatever. Well, yeah, but, they also talk about situational awareness in death investigation reports, such as that of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And you have to ask, how much would your situational awareness be impacted if, for example, the rail traffic control told you no other trains are coming in? Would you be a little less attentive if you're coming off of a long trip? Would you be a little less attentive as you're walking to the office? Probably, because hey, rail traffic control, they have confirmed no more trains coming in. So things like that would, in my opinion, impact your situational awareness. And the fact that rail traffic controllers are being added to the supposed new rewrite of the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, as Chrystia Freeland, the new Minister of Transportation, is trying to overhaul that regulation. Well, I suspect there's a reason they know that they need to add rail traffic controllers to that. And not just because of this, but because of other issues that I've raised pertaining to the qualifications of rail traffic controllers in some of my materials. So again, you have to ask yourself, are proper investigations being conducted when there's rail workers being killed? We know there's definitely garbage investigations and garbage death investigation reports being put out there, but how much more are they hiding in some of these other deaths? Because proper investigations into negligence don't get conducted. So a lawsuit had been filed on behalf of these families, the Timmerman family and the family of Jamie, because these families were arguing that the men were denied their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and security of the person because the rail police failed to properly investigate their own companies, and they created a situation where safety problems were not addressed and ultimately cost these men their lives. So given my analysis into the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, I'm definitely of that opinion that, we're not getting proper investigations into these issues. They're all being swept under the carpet because nobody has said, hey, your gig's up. And the issues were very thoroughly investigated. It took me literally years to uncover what I am now sharing via all of these videos. And, the average person is not going to spend years of their life doing what I did. I did it because in one case, a death hit a little too close to home. Could have been my child that night instead of a friend and coworker. And so that's when I set out on my mission to look at the rail industry as closely as I could to help change whatever was wrong with it. But I'll tell you, I never would have imagined the journey that this took me on as far as how many violations of the law were actually happening. Okay, again, so when we had the Mackyard incident in September 2007, okay, and that led to the supposed overhaul of the SOR 87-150, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. That incident resulted in this document, again known as TCO 0-102, dated and approved by the Governor and Council on June 23, 2009, when John Baird was the Minister of Transportation. Now, TCO 0-102, or the Rules Respecting Minimum Qualification Standards for Railway Employees, would be an attempt to water down regulations into just rules. Regulations are enforceable in court. Rules are not, and that is per a Government of Canada website. If you haven't looked at the video, it's in the playlist, I believe, We're So Lied To, that talks about acts, regulation, rules, guidelines, what's the difference, and why does it matter. There's 2 videos talking about that. You need to look at that because that is critical information that everybody needs to understand as we go through all of these issues and materials. So they tried to water down regulations and make them just rules, which again are not really enforceable in court. So here's my question. When I look at, the timelines for all these issues and what was going on, and all of the different ministers of transportation, when they decided to overhaul the Railway Employee Qualification Standards regulation because of the Mackyard incident, it was the Railway Association of Canada that was supposed to coordinate all those, documents from all the rail carriers and come up with the training programs for the rail industry and submit that and work with Transport Canada to overhaul those. Well, the Railway Association of Canada, those are not politicians. That association represents 50 to 60 rail carriers operating in Canada, including all of their members include all 7 Class 1 rail carriers operating in the U.S. So BNSF, CSX, Union Pacific, they're all included as members of the Railway Association of Canada. So you have to ask yourself, would they all be liable in some of these issues? I think the argument might be made for that because, again, this is basically a group of rail executives that play a huge role in the writing of regulations or rules or training programs pertaining to the rail industry and frontline rail workers. Well, if the Railway Association of Canada is made up of a bunch of rail executives, is their first goal really going to be rail safety and railway employee safety? Or might it be maximization of shareholder wealth and of my next bonus? I think that's a very valid question, and one that maybe a lot of people need to look into. So the final point that I want to make here, as it pertains to the Railway Association of Canada and, all of these different ministers of transportation, what I would ask is the Railway Association of Canada waiting for a change of the guard at Transport Canada to try and push its agenda? Or, in my opinion, the watering down of regulations there to protect frontline rail workers? If you've got all this, changing of who's in charge of Transport Canada, and there's not a proper handing over of the issues from one Minister of Transportation to the next, to the next, to the next, that would provide a really good opportunity for someone to push an agenda which may not be in the best interest of frontline rail workers or of, the public or taxpayers. And that's what you have to ask yourself, because the order came, from the Mackyard incident in 2007 under one Minister of Transportation, but then it's another Minister of Transportation that ends up reviewing what came out as the new document for the supposed rewrite of those qualification standards. And so you have to, again, ask yourself, business people will often say, and so do politicians, never waste a good crisis. So yeah, we had the Mackyard crisis, and that was supposed to, result in all this great new legislation, but they used it as an opportunity, in my opinion, to try to water down the regulations into just rules. And, again, you have to know the players and understand the issues. Not surprising to me, John Baird, who approved the new rules, again, watered down from regulations. Well, the new rules were approved under John Baird, Minister of Transportation, in June of 2009. Is it any wonder that maybe John Baird went to become a board member at CP Rail after, when he left his political life? Just saying. When I see stuff like that, it's a huge issue, a huge concern. Okay, so what I'm providing for you here, again, is after the Mackyard incident, which happened in September of 2007. Then Minister of Transportation Lawrence Cannon wrote this order, and it appears on page 30 of the Railway Investigation Report R07T0270 pertaining to that incident, where here it says on the 21st of December 2007, the Minister of Transport, pursuant to Section 19(1)A of the Railway Safety Act. So if you remember, when we were looking at violations of law, the Railway Safety Act Section 19 is where the minister can initiate changes to training programs, whereas Section 20 was for when a railway carrier itself wanted to initiate changes to the railway, the frontline rail worker training programs. So this was a Railway Safety Act Section 19 order, which gave the Minister of Transportation the authority to write an order in matters pertaining to frontline rail worker training programs. So this is what we had here as a result of what happened in the Mac Yard, because it was obvious in the Mac Yard incident that rail workers, frontline rail workers, were being fake qualified. And we're going to get into a lot more on the Mac Yard incident and the attempted rewrite of the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, which was the result of this particular order. So the document which resulted was that TCO 0-102. It resulted from this order in 2007. So if you look here, it says, on the 21st of December, the Minister of Transportation, pursuant to Section 19(1)A of the Railway Safety Act, ordered all federally regulated railway companies to develop and file a rule to update and replace CTC 1987-3 rail. That's another name for SOR 87-150, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. CTC refers to the Canadian Transportation Commission. This was a 1987 law passed in March, which is the third month, and then it had to do with rail. So when this law first was done, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, SOR 87-150, it was published in the Canada Gazette as CTC 1987-3 rail, and then next to that you had the SOR 87-150. It's the same law, it's the same regulation. It's got two different things that you can refer to it by. So that's the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. So the revised rule should include, at a minimum, the following. And then they go through, and the order stated what they were supposed to do and provide to Transport Canada for its review by the minister. And again, these program changes had to be reviewed and approved by the Minister of Transportation prior to field implementation. Now, here's what I want you to notice on these two pages, okay? And at the bottom here on the right, on page 31, that arrow just says that the new rules would not come into effect until the old regulation, or SOR 87-150, was repealed. So here's the thing I want you to gather here. This is a Railway Safety Act Section 19 order issued by a Minister of Transportation, but it's ordering federally regulated railway companies to develop and come up with a new rule, a revised rule, a new rule to update SOR 87-150. So we would be going from a regulation to a rule. A regulation is enforceable in court. Never miss a good opportunity, never waste a good crisis. So we would be taking a regulation and via this order, making it potentially just a rule, not enforceable in court. The complete and total watering down of laws that were there to protect the public and frontline rail workers. And the attempt to do this was ordered by a Minister of Transportation, according to this, ordering the watering down of regulations there to protect frontline rail workers and the public and taxpayers. This to me is so appalling. And the average person, unless you understand the difference between acts, regulations, rules, guidelines, whatever, you wouldn't catch this stuff necessarily as you read through the document pertaining to the Mackyard incident. You know, you have to be a lawyer to pick up on this stuff almost. I worked with a bunch of lawyers in Chicago, and at one time I wanted to be a lawyer, but then I realized, in my opinion, it's just such a corrupt industry that I couldn't see going into law. So went into finance instead. But anyway, so that's what I want you to notice here. You've got a minister of transportation that ordered the watering down of a regulation into rules. And the new document, again, TCO 0-102, what was the name of that document? It wasn't a regulation, it was rules respecting minimum qualification standards for railway employees. Rules, not regulations, rules. That's a key point that everybody needs to understand. Okay, before we move on from this Railway Safety Act Section 19 order, which resulted from the Mackyard incident, I also want you to notice here the two arrows on the first page, on page 30. Here it shows that they were supposed to do training programs for the remote control operators, and this was a remote control operations accident in Mackyard. So the remote control operator was not part of SOR 87-150. So since 1987, basically until today, the remote control locomotive operator or belt pack operations were not specifically included in the regulation. That's why in 2019, then Minister of Transportation, Marc Garneau, decided to issue guidelines for remote control operations because I had pointed out the very glaring problems with the fact that there were no appropriate training programs at Transport Canada for remote control operators. And there had been a death of a remote control operator in Saskatchewan, and that was in, I think, 2017, and that had resulted in me looking at a lot of issues tied to belt packs, and we're going to get into that whole issue of belt pack training and the games that get played when it comes to the proper training of belt pack operators. But anyways, you can see here that in this order, back in 2007, Transport Canada realized we need to include remote control operators and rail traffic controllers in the regulation, in the new, not the regulation, back then it was a new rule or new training programs. Well, folks, that ended up never happening. The document that was created was a total public scam, and it did, if you look on the page 31 here, okay, page 31 says the new rules would not come into effect until SOR 87-150 or the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulations is repealed by the Governor in Council. That never happened. The regulation was never repealed, and so the rules never went into effect. And so the new training programs that would have been put together, if they were even done by this group that was supposed to overhaul these training programs, none of it ever went into effect. And so you have to wonder, was it all just a veiled, a pretend safety action taken? If this was so important, why was there no follow-through? Why were the training programs never overhauled? This happened in 2007. It's only now, after I've gone to the U.S. rail industry, because they're now impacted by what's been going on in Canada, because their companies are now being headed by people who were major players in all of this. Don't forget, 2007 is when we had the Backyard incident. That's when Keith Creel, who is now president of CPKC, was the chief operations officer at CN Rail. He had assumed that role after the former chief operations officer left, and he was kind of the acting, I think, chief operations officer. We're going to get into that when we review Keith Creel as one of the players. But he would have been the person who would have been in charge of operations at CN Rail when we had the Backyard incident. And so if this was so important, Keith Creel was the chief operations officer at CN Rail until 2013. Why were training programs never overhauled? Where was Transport Canada? It's only now in 2025 that new Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland, who used to be the Minister of Finance of Canada, can you say massive liabilities? Well, and she was Deputy Prime Minister. She's known of these problems that I've documented with her since at least 2019. Where was your rush to get into overhauling these training programs? Why was that never done under Justin Trudeau? Why is it just now that this is a priority? Is it because the U.S. is now being involved? And you know that disclosure torpedoes are coming your way as far as the government of Canada and the potential massive liabilities you could be facing? In my opinion, that's absolutely what it is. Because if you look here, we were supposed to overhaul and include remote control operations and rail traffic controllers. Well, that's exactly what Chrystia Freeland is trying to do in her now supposed rewrite of the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And I'm here to tell you, from what I've read on the supposed overhaul of that key regulation, there are a lot of problems with it. And if you are a frontline rail worker, I don't care if you're in Canada or the U.S., you need to push back on what's being proposed. That goes for rail customers and, of course, rail investors. You all have a lot to lose if poor regulations are put in place, because it's not just going to be frontline rail workers who are going to be putting their lives on the line. It's going to be your health and safety as rail customers and as rail investors. Mark my words, you put the wrong regulation in place, you're going to have problems. Chrystia Freeland, in my opinion, is not the person to be overhauling this regulation. Too many conflicts of interest. She's known about this for years. And the new Privy Council, the new clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Sabia, was a former CN Rail executive, including chief financial officer. At the very time that CN went from a Crown Corporation of Canada to a privately traded company in 1995. So did CN file all of the required Railway Safety Act Section 20 paperwork that needed to be filed when they went from a 2-year training program to one of only a few months? Did Michael Sabia and CN Rail do that as rail executives? Is Michael Sabia appointed the new clerk of the Privy Council in Canada, reporting directly to the Prime Minister, because he was potentially a person also who might have a whole lot to hide from the public in these issues? So, I just don't trust any of them any further than I can throw them, and that's for good reason. And in my opinion, Freeland and Sabia should be recusing themselves from anything having to do with the rewrite of this regulation. It is too important, not only for frontline rail workers, but for rail customers and rail investors. Chrystia Freeland has had 6 years that she's known about these issues. You were Deputy Prime Minister. Why the fire drill now to overhaul this? In my opinion, it's only because she knows the U.S. is now involved. And you will note that when President Trump speaks of Chrystia Freeland, it is not with any admiration at all. In my opinion, he can't stand that woman. and I'm of the same opinion. Can't stand her either. Fake News Freeland, she was a journalist, you know, a person who was a reporter, in my opinion, should not be overseeing this regulation. Fake News Freeland, she will know how to spin a good story, though, in my humble opinion, and try and make it look like what she's doing will be a proper overhaul of this regulation. So look for the red flags, folks, because the union is already showing that there are serious red flags with what is being proposed. Freeland is not the person, in my opinion, to overhaul this regulation. Okay, if you recall, I was showing you how, if they did rewrite the regulation pertaining to Railway Employee Qualification Standards regulation, that regulation could not go into effect until, or if they wrote those rules could not go into effect until the regulation was repealed. And so by the time that they did their, what I call total public scam and attempt to water down the regulation into just rules, we now had John Baird as Minister of Transportation. He was there from October 30th, 2008 to August of 2010. And so the Mackyard Section 19 order was done under Lawrence Cannon, and then John Baird took over as Minister of Transportation. So he would have been the person John Baird would have been there when the Governor and Council approved the new rules respecting minimum qualification standards for railway employees, or TCO 0-102. The new proposed rules were approved, but per the Railway Safety Act, could not go into effect until the regulation they were supposed to replace was repealed. And that never happened. Don't ask me why, I don't know, but it never happened. After leaving, I don't know, if it was a new election thing or a change again of the minister. I don't know. After leaving public service, John Baird joined CP Rail, later CPKC, as a member of the board of directors, where he remains to this day. And remember, acts override regulations and regulations override rules. Only acts and regulations are enforceable in court per the Government of Canada's own website. Now, the two screen prints that I have down here, when the Section 19 order was issued as a result of the Mackyard incident, okay, you have several federally regulated railways in Canada, and so it appears to be the Railway Association of Canada that is kind of the party that is responsible for gathering the information maybe from all its members and coming up with the new rule that Transport Canada would then approve. And so if you look at these two screen prints, they are both from the website. Well, one of them is from the TCRC website, the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference. That's the first one. But it does show that this document was from the Railway Association of Canada. That was their old logo, I guess. And it's called Rules Respecting Minimum Qualification Standards for Railway Employees, a document known as TCO 0-102. TC stands for Transport Canada, and the second arrow under there shows approved on June 23rd, 2009. So that was what I believe is the original document itself that was put out by the Railway Association of Canada for Transport Canada's approval. So does that mean it's a Transport Canada document, or is it still a Railway Association of Canada document? Given it's the Transport Canada that initiated this rewrite of the rules and which had to approve these rules, the Railway Association of Canada kind of acts as an agency of Transport Canada in putting together these rules and training programs and such. And so if you're acting as an agency for the Government of Canada, it's still ultimately Transport Canada that would be responsible for what's in this document. with, it could be argued the Railway Association of Canada, in my opinion, could also, be responsible for it. But ultimately, I think the responsibility for what's in here, given it had to be approved, because if something's not approved, it wouldn't be in here in the final document. So Transport Canada has the ultimate say in what is in this document, not the Railway Association of Canada, Transport Canada, who had to approve these changes. Okay? And again, this was at a time when Keith Creel was this Chief Operations Officer at CN Rail. Now, the other thing here, the other screen print, is from the first one I took as a screen print from the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference. The second screen print is, and it's bigger than that. I took away the picture that was on the Railway Association of Canada's website, but this did come from the Railway Association of Canada's website, and it's the document TCO. I want you to notice here, 102.1. There was no 0.1 before. It was just TCO-0-102. No 0.1. What's the 0.1 for? I used to work with a lot of programmers, and I took some screen prints of this when I did this research, and I collated it in another document. I took the document properties. If I looked for TCO 102, for the Railway Association of Canada, nothing would come up. And so I think it was 2017. If you look at the date here, the third arrow kind of in the middle pointing towards the top shows 2017, May of 2017, okay? This document, and this would have been after I started raising red flags as far as potential fake qualifications in the rail industry. And I started documenting those issues in 2016 with the Prime Minister and others at the Government of Canada. And so why would the Railway Association of Canada, there were two changes made to this document. The cover page, as far as the pictures, okay, the text, all the text, as far as the actual rules respecting minimum qualification standards for railway employees, is exactly the same. Only two things have changed on this document. The cover page, they're both on the cover page. So they changed it from this blue logo, whatever, to this new logo, and there's a picture here. There was a picture also on the cover page of a train and a rail worker hanging on to it, which I blanked that out because a lot of times pictures are copyrighted by photographers and whatever. But anyways, so here's the thing. The only way that this document changed in 2017 was two ways. They added a new cover page, and they didn't just change the look of the cover page. You can see here that there's a very key change that was added, which is not on the version which was provided to the union. Why did the union not have the latest version on its website? Was this latest version not provided to the union? Here's the issue. On the union side, it says approved on June 23, 2009. But on the Railway Association of Canada website, after I started raising all my issues pertaining to fake qualifications, because this document, TCO-0102, and you'll notice here, the 0102 has also been changed. So the name of the document has been changed online. If you searched for TCO-102, this document for the Railway Association of Canada was not coming up because this has been renamed to TCO-102.1. Why are they renaming a key document that is referred to in a railway death investigation report pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, making it so that you could not find the document referred to in Jason's accident online at the Railway Association of Canada? Should documents that are in death investigation reports just mysteriously disappear? That's a very valid question. So I took the document properties and I could show exactly the dates on which this had been changed and who did the change, because they had to log in with their user IDs to make these changes. So they changed the actual reference number for the document. They changed the cover page in two key ways. The picture, okay, which is not key. The key thing is really where these arrows are, where it says June 23rd, 2009. Now there's a little asterisk next to the 2009. You didn't have that on the Union version where you have the blue logo. You don't have that on that version. Only do you have that little asterisk now on the new version that is on the Railway Association of Canada website. And by the way, this document has now, I believe, disappeared from that website completely. So again, why are documents disappearing when they were part of a railway death investigation report? Isn't that kind of an issue? I think that's an issue. If a document is referred to in a death investigation report, you should be able to find it easily online. And that wasn't the case. But anyways, so the little asterisk now says, this rule is not in effect until the regulation is revoked. Okay, that's true. Why wasn't that, the Railway Association of Canada has all these rail executives. You guys know the rail laws. You know the Railway Safety Act. You're going to tell me that your lawyers did not know that the new proposed rules would not go into effect until the old regulation was repealed? You're going to tell me that it took you 10 years to figure that out and add your little asterisk after I started raising red flags about fake qualifications in the rail industry? That's what you're expecting us to believe. This document never went into effect. Why was it still on your website? It sure, in my opinion, provided a great document to pull a line here and there for death investigations to say, well, we were working on it, but we just never got to it. It did get approved. But we were working on it. See, it's in this document. But now the document's disappeared from their website, right? There's a lot of issues here, folks. But you're going to tell me that the big Railway Association of Canada that has all those lawyers and all those big rail executives wouldn't have known to add this little asterisk to their document for 10 years? And that, they wouldn't have given the updated document to the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, the union that represents rail employees in Canada? I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. Why were these changes made in 2017? And who made them and why? That's what I'd like to know. Okay, so the next Minister of Transportation would have been Chuck Strahl, and then Denis Lebel. Now, given the Mackyard incident of 2007 and the failed rewrite and/or implementation of the new proposed rules respecting minimum qualification standards for railway employees, or the supposed replacement of SOR 87-150, and given that Transport Canada knew for years now of a problem with fake qualifications, they've known since at least 2007, with that Mackyard incident. What did Transport Canada do under these ministers of transportation to ensure frontline rail workers were being properly trained and or qualified? There's the whole financial fraud issue too here. If you're allowing all this to just be swept under the carpet, misrepresentation of material facts and the fact that frontline rail workers are being fake qualified, I think there's many a rail investor that would consider that a misrepresentation of a material fact, given the potential liabilities. And also, there's a definite problem when ministers change duties in the middle of critical legislation rewrites, such as SOR 87-150. So who drops the ball? Who dropped the ball in such critical oversight roles when it comes to the safety not only of frontline rail workers, but also of the public in general? Not to mention all the financial fraud issues. Again, folks, there's plenty of stuff here that the ball should not have been dropped the way that it was. Transport Canada knew they had a massive problems on their hands back in 2007. Enough of a problem to, for Transport Canada to initiate the rewrite of all and the redo of all frontline rail worker training programs. So this was no small issue. They knew they had a problem back in 2007. That is almost 20 years ago, folks. Okay, so the last Minister of Transportation under Prime Minister Harper was a woman by the name of Lisa Raitt, and she would have been the Minister of Transportation when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed, and she was therefore the one who signed off on that garbage Transportation Safety Board death investigation report known as R13W0260. Now, had Minister Raitt, in my opinion, spent 10 minutes reading the witness statements, she would have realized there were serious concerns, such as switch labels not matching what was in R13W0260, the whole issue of TS12, track switch 13, and track switch 15 discussed in witness statements versus track switch 21, 22, and 23 discussed in the Transportation Safety Board report. Kind of a glaring contradiction there as to the facts in the case. And again, you could have figured this out in 10 minutes had you spent the time to read the witness statements. Did you read the witness statements, former Minister of Transportation Lisa Raitt? And if you did, why did you not raise a whole lot of red flags as far as that Transportation Safety Board report? Now, I'll tell you, I have a question, and maybe it's an answer to that, to the why no red flags were raised. About 6 months after Minister Raitt signed off on this garbage TSB investigation report, as far as its accuracy and completeness in the interest of advancing rail safety in Canada, Milton, Ontario, the very area represented by Minister Lisa Raitt, would be where CN Rail would build its massive new intermodal terminal, surely providing many new jobs in Lisa Raitt's home turf, including a fairly good tax base that would come with that. But that is all just coincidence, of course, right? The fact that this got announced 6 months after she signed off on that report. CN had been holding on to that land and hadn't done anything with it for years. Of course, Lisa Raitt will argue, I'm sure, that she was against the Milton Intermodal Terminal. But that might be just because, she may have thought that it would bring a lot of new jobs and tax base to her area. But when the people of that area found out that CN was going to build this massive terminal there, this massive 24 hours, 7-day-a-week intermodal terminal, there started to be a lot of public outcry against the Milton Intermodal facility for CN Rail. So, yeah, I just have to ask myself, was this payback by CN Rail for Lisa Raitt's area, the area she represented as a minister and as a member of parliament, or just a coincidence that this area would be where CN's next massive intermodal terminal would be built? Just saying, these are all issues that when I see these things pop up, I just kind of, I don't trust any of them. I just don't trust any of them. So you can say that, oh, I'm not for it because my people weren't for it. Well, maybe you weren't for it because the people decided not to be for it. But maybe, when you first found out about it, you were for it because it would bring a great number of jobs and a fantastic new tax base to the area you represented as a member of parliament. So just something I'm putting out there as a potential issue. Not saying that was the case, but I'm just saying when I find stuff like this, I just find it suspicious. So that's all I'm going to say on it. But in my opinion, had Lisa Raitt spent 10 minutes reviewing the supervising conductor witness statement, she would have seen that there were some massive discrepancies with the final Transportation Safety Board report when it came to something as simple as the labeling of the track switches at that location. So, I don't know, should ministers of transportation be forced to read witness statements when there's a death in the rail industry? Seems to me that should be part of your job. But then, what do I know?